Hello. Okay. So, all right. Hi, folks. Today I have another great conversation. I'm really excited. I have been talking to Allie about this for a little while now. So my friend and genius psychotherapist entrepreneur here, Allie, or I know her as Allie. She goes by Alexandra. Uh, and she and I go way back, or I guess way back for adults, I think. To grad school. We were roommates in grad school. Um, I don't know if I would have survived grad school without her. So she's a near and dear friend of mine. And she is a psychotherapist specializing in relationships and what was the other thing you said?
Sex therapy.
Therapy. I was like, I think that was what it was, but I was like, I think it's sexual dynamics. But anyway, all
Same.
of those things. She does all of those things, and she's a budding entrepreneur out of Mexico. And so anyway, so we're gonna today, she and I are, part of the reason I think why we have been friends for so long and our friendship has survived many cross-country international moves and trips and all sorts of adventures, because we're both very multifaceted. We are creatives at heart who also have a humanitarian bend and are constantly trying to find ways to blend all of those interests into something meaningful and purposeful. So today we're going to talk, I'll have her do a more proper introduction of herself if she wants to. And then we're going to just have a conversation around, the way that we haven't engaged with creativity, self-expression, both therapeutically, but also just, I guess it's all to me, it's all therapeutic, even if it's not within the bounds of structured therapy. But basically we're going to nerd out about creativity and all of the things that it means, especially in the context of interpersonal dynamics, relationships, and that sort of creative energy. There's a lot of overlap between sex and creativity, in case you weren't familiar. You feel like that, I don't know, is that common knowledge now? I don't know. Is it I feel
I
like
think within certain communities it is.
yeah. So anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about. So Allie, is there anything that you want to share or add before we get into it?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the invitation to have me on here. I'm just excited to get to have another conversation with my dearest confidant for literally everything in life. Whether it comes to, personal matters or clinical matters or business matters, whatever it is. So I'm looking forward to the conversation we'll have and how we can use creativity as a tool to spark change, whether it's in our own lives or in communities or society at large.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's all the little things, right? It's all, we don't talk about big stuff ever. No. What? Just that. But I think it's true, something that I so just to launch into it, right? I think we've probably had this conversation in some form. There, I'm sure some of this is going to be repeat for us in some way, but I do lately, especially in the context of poetry and wordsmithing, so to speak, using verbal language, and especially the intersection between music and sort of melody and language. I've been thinking about that a lot for the past couple of weeks. And it's so interesting. It's something, because it's something that has actually been sort of primal, it's for many millennia. It's something that we've done. And it's always been a position of power in different societies to be able to to be the story keeper or to be the storyteller, to be the narrator, to be the one who could sing and tell the stories, whether that was in court, whether that was as a spiritual leader, whether that was to in the public square, just the power of storytelling and who gets to write the songs and who gets to sing the songs. And there's like a really rich history, like we don't have to go that deep into it, but there's a really rich history that I've been learning about that has been really interesting to look at, like especially in today's society, and the people who tend to be censored or devalued in different ways because of the power that holds. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like in the United States today, it's interesting that that position doesn't hold the value that it's held in other cultures or in other periods of time.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So there's this, I haven't actually, I think I've like maybe made it through the first chapter. So like this, I don't know, I haven't gotten through the whole book, but what is it? It's The White Goddess by some British guy. Who I do, it's a book from decades ago, but he did like this deep dive into this sort of topic. But one thing that he talked about, like there's again, like this is how I read, um, is like I read just like everything. Like if you want to peek behind like how I retain so much random information, it's because I don't really focus on one thing deep enough. I read something and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm gonna lock that away. And then I move on to the next thing. Like little hummingbird collecting nectar. And then I don't remember like half of the citations of where I found out the information. I just remember, oh, I read this somewhere or I heard this somewhere. But anyway, so this is one of those tidbits from this book. That's as far as I can remember, details wise. But he was talking about like with um there's some sort of distinction between like bard and minstrel, and I forget which one is like fits where in the hierarchy in sort of around Roman, like around that transition between like pre-Roman, Celtic, like pre sort of pre-Catholic times, and then how that evolved after Catholicism and like the sort of the religio patriarchy came in and sort of took over. Um and so it speaks to that point of like the minstrel essentially became just like for entertainment, and that's what then became permissible, whereas the origin of the minstrel were like they were considered the lesser form of the bard. And I might have that backwards because stuff, but basically because the bards were like the ones where like they would learn the songs and they would take on apprentices and they would have to spend years, like because it's the oral tradition, right? So the only way these stories were going to be remembered is if you could remember exactly how they were told by someone who was teaching you how to tell it by ear. And so it's like that whole sort of tradition and practice. And so it was like held in this really high regard because they were the only ones who were the story keepers, and the sort of they kept history, right? They were the sort of the ones that kept the history and had sort of this gatekeeping and ownership over these songs. But as society and like the power structures shifted, it turned into like only songs for entertainment, and that was what was only allowed, and it would be punished otherwise, because you know truth and history holds influence. And so yeah, so I do think it's like this, it's this fascinating thing where like dynamic, I think, where I think the two of us are sort of at in our own process, and why I think it's so important that we're having these types of conversations more and more broadly, like outside of just like creative circles, like artist circles, is because I think each of us has so much creative potential. We like, regardless of what form it takes. And so often it has been shunned, devalued, shamed in some way because it doesn't fit into the power, or it challenges the power structure that exists. And so I think that is something that's really interesting. And I know that's an area that you focus on a lot, is it's like in that space of like creative expression is empowerment, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think in so many ways, I actually have been reading this book and I have it right next to me because I was referencing it in something I was writing, but it's Acts of Resistance, The Power of Art to Create a Better World by Amber Massey Blomfield. And um, she basically like reviews a bunch of case studies of art that was used as a form of political resistance, and a catalyst for some sort of political like movement or political change. And so there is a lot of power in art, like you said, and people are afraid of that probably. And that's why it gets so devalued because it is um, something that helps people challenge the status quo and think about things in different ways. And so it is like a subversive, it can have a subversive sort of tone to just people like thinking for themselves and speaking out, or having some form of expression for speaking out. And then that is also empowering on just a personal level because you're not repressing whatever you have emotionally, you know, so the act of speaking out kind of helps. Or, you know, whether speaking out is verbal or in the written word or in dancing or music or however that may be, like you're releasing it from your body and your mind and sharing it with the world and connecting with other people based off of that. So it's like an active form of healing as well.
Yeah, yeah, because it's that like we have agency and autonomy over what we express and how we express it. Unless we buy into a story or like a sort of false narrative that, you know, you're not allowed to talk about certain things, you're not allowed to express certain things or certain
Mhm.
parts of yourself. And so I get like it's that like, yeah, you know, like finding those ways of expression and not and like unshaming them, de-shaming them is extremely liberating to be like to just as like individually to just be able to say like this is you know what like I am not a painter but I'm just gonna like throw some paint on a canvas or I'm gonna do this because it makes me feel good or it makes me feel free and it's not about you know the sort of consumer side of art where it's like you have to like have a certain level of talent or skill or notoriety for your art to be and that to like where we're kind of turning all of our hobbies into things that we like that
Mhm.
are trying to sell because everybody's trying to survive
Right.
you know and so like but it's like that's not the point right the point is express it like the point is just expression the point is exactly what you're talking about it's just getting it out of like unstuck from wherever it's
Mhm.
stuck in your body, in your system, in your psyche. Because sometimes just for, like even sometimes like what I have found for myself, and you know, I don't know if you have a similar experience, but like just like playing the piano for like 15 minutes, even though I know like jack shit about music composition, right? Just like playing some songs or just like doing something or like move or dancing around my house or whatever just doing that kind of like release or having that kind of outlet, suddenly I'm like, oh, you know what? I have this really brilliant idea for this like piece of content or for this like job proposal or whatever it is. Like let me go like now it's like my brain is it clears up the headspace so then I can actually focus on things like other ideas or other avenues that I care about or that are important to me. And it's so it's not necessarily about like, you know, it's not always about business, like whatever, but it's like the oh, like I no longer feel stuck or in this state of like functional freeze where I'm like just trying to survive or cope or like get through the day.
Mhm.
Like I have let this out and now I can move on with my day or my life.
Exactly. And it's hard to be in like to stay in a bad mood or in a funk or like feeling down and out when you're, you know, dancing around your house to your favorite songs and just wiling out.
Yeah. And so I wonder, so I know for me, there was like a really pivotal, I mean, there was one example in particular where I realized just how important like in this particular case, like dance, but like movement and art and that kind of form of expression was really impactful. And I wonder if you have, before I share mine, if you have, if there's something that comes to mind, or I can share mine first if you want to think about it.
You share yours first.
So I remember, this is like a small thing, but like what it was like a summer in college, I want to say between sophomore and junior year, whatever, years, between years in college. And I was like interning and like living on campus and doing this stuff. And it had been probably at that point, like 3 to 4 years since I had taken any sort of like more formal dance class, like lyrical ballet, tap, like that kind of a thing. And so I found this lyrical or like contemporary jazz class that had a drop in. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go because I've just been feeling like something like I'm feeling and I've been sleeping terribly, all of this stuff. I go into that class and we do this combination to Maxwell's cover of this woman's work. And I just remember like, I'm like, this is a drop in, like, I don't know, like it's been years. My like flexibility, like what I used to be able to do versus what I could do in that class is like miles apart. And so I was alive to that, but I was like, fuck it. Like, let me just like, but I'm like really feeling this choreography. And so I was just like pouring myself into this choreography. And one, like people seemed to notice, which was, I was like, oh, that's cool. But then I got home, I felt so good. I had the best sleep. It was like whatever I like that, whatever emotion and like depth of expression that choreography required was like exactly the kind of catharsis I needed, both physically and mentally. And so like I came home and I was like, I took a shower and I like had the best sleep of my life. Like it was so good. And I was like, oh, maybe I should keep dancing. Maybe there's something to this. Maybe this is something that's helpful.
Did you keep going after that?
I went, I think that summer I went back a couple more times. And then once the school year started back up, I didn't really make it. And then I think I went again. I remember going again sometime after that. At least it was like, but it was like at least a year, if not 2 years after that. I want to say it was like maybe after I graduated. And so it was good. Like it was good. It was more of just one of those, like being a college student and in a graduate of 2009, the funds for like $15 drop-in classes were limited. So, so it was like very piecemeal, like when I would go.
Right.
But when I went, and then there's the whole, like salsa in Honduras that like kind of saved
Sure.
a little bit. But because it was a similar thing where it was just like, this is a space that I feel comfortable in enough. Like it's the language of dance and the language of like physical interpretation of music is something that feels familiar. It's a language I'm familiar with and a cult like a subculture that I'm familiar with. And so when I'm in those spaces, it like the people make a difference, I will say, is what I've learned over time, is like if the community is like it has to be like that kind of vibe where it's like welcoming or where people aren't like,
Right, of course.
where it's not like too clicky. Um and then it feels good. Or where at least or where the interpersonal dynamics don't matter as much because the choreography, because like whoever the instructor is or whoever's choreography we're learning is like so attuned to the song. Like I think that to me is what makes a difference, because sometimes you go to like, and I don't know if you've had this experience because I know you dance too, where you go to classes and it's like the choreography might be like fun, but it's not really like connected to the song, or where it's sort of like, or you have that like hard time connecting, like just connecting beyond just like 5, 6, 7, 8, boom, boom, cat, whatever, like
Right.
can't speak. you know, when it actually like there's a way of sort of connecting either musicality wise or lyrically to the music, then it's like, yeah, like let me get lost in this. Like fuck everybody.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, what you describe, I think, describes how I survived my childhood and adolescence with dance. Well, dance, music, writing,
Yeah.
all of those things. Like, I don't know if I would have made it, but I think dance had a particular energy to it, that really helped me like release and cope with whatever, struggles I was dealing with. Like it was really medicinal for me, I felt. And then when I became an adult, I had this weird belief that like it just was too much of a luxury to fit into my adult life. Like, oh, this is something that, I can do because I'm a kid essentially. And now that I have to like grow up and work and do all these things, like, dance isn't really a part of that. And yeah, I would say that was pretty dark for me, like because I didn't have that sort of energetic like flow and expression and connection with like other people in that community, um up until very recently when I've started like doing it again. And it really does feel for me like life, like okay, I feel alive, now that I've like done whatever movement for the day. Like I'm good. Like my body, mind, and spirit needed that. And we can, yeah, now like focus with clarity on whatever is happening in the day. So I think there's something about it. I mean, all exercise has its benefits in different forms, but it is different than like, let's say, just lifting weights where you're not expressing your body. Like there's not that form of self-expression involved, that allows you to just be free,
Yeah.
right? It's like very different from following a very regimented like routine of exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think, like there's like certain parallels where like I could kind of, when I rode, like you take your body to such a limit sometimes, like especially when you're racing, that it like there is a little bit of that, like I'm pouring everything into this. And so it's like there's a level of like physical release that kind of
Mhm.
like everything gets jumbled together. But I think like with what you're saying with dance and what I've experienced is it's like there's exercise and there's sort of like pushing your body or testing your body or doing things that make your body feel really good and like give you that kind of endorphin energy, which is nice and it's good and there's nothing wrong with it. But then there's like telling a story and telling your story through the choreography. Like I think that
Mhm.
was like there was just I'm like that like there was something about that particular combination that has stuck with me because that was like 2007. So, so not to age me entirely, but like however many years it's been like more than a decade. It's been what, like 15 years almost. Like since
Right.
that, I don't think I'll ever forget that class. It was one drop-in class, right? And so like I think that and that's impacted me so much. And so I think that's the other thing that's important for us to like keep in perspective is like one, art is for everybody, and two, like when like it doesn't take a lot. Like sometimes it's just that one moment or that one experience
Mhm.
that like opens you up or that like really just has this impact and allows you like it liberates you on some level. And it's like it's not like one and done, but like having like that the impact that that teacher and his choreography had because like that class in that moment and that song and the way that he led us through movement to it, like the sort of the moves that we did with it, it was like, yeah, like putting all of this like stress and overwhelm and like all of the stuff that I was like stressed about and worried about and overwhelmed about, like I was very much like deep in my like probably borderline, if not completely white savior area of trying to save the world, and run away from my own problems at the same time. So, like, you know, like, so it was like very much like that, like young, naive, and ignorant like era of like, no, the normal way to do things is to repress them until you can go to a dance class and then like let it all out on the floor, right?
Right.
And so like yeah, it's just this element of like being able to tell a story or pour something that you don't feel like you have the words to express, or like something that even you can't be honest about with yourself. You can be like there's a way of like um there's almost like a distance sometimes that creative expression can create. Creative expression can create, so many look at my vocabulary. Right, but like, but you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's something I feel like we've talked about this too, but like even like writing fiction or like or doing like narrative therapy where you have someone tell a story, but it's not like it's often their story, but you're not telling them that like you're telling them to make up a story and then they make up a story and it's stuff that maybe they aren't really like ready to confront head on, but there's a way to confront it like, down around the bend by speaking indirectly to it or by putting a different face to it that allows people to then like process something that might be really difficult or overwhelming or scary to just like dive right into.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think I see this come up a lot with couples who are lacking intimacy in their relationships. And um, a lot of times I think they are too afraid to share with their partner that they aren't satisfied or they don't have a desire or that they're feeling self-conscious or anxious or bad about themselves or whatever vulnerability that is getting in the way of them being able to enjoy a sex life with their partner. They're just a lot of the times too afraid to say anything or confront it. So it's like, we have to get to that piece in a sort of roundabout way sometimes, but obviously there has to be the safety, like the container of safety in order for them to be able to really like share
Yeah.
openly. And then a lot of people don't even understand like what their desires are or what they're interested in because we've been so conditioned to um have to like fulfill certain roles
Yeah.
sexually and not really think out of the box to like, wait, what do I actually enjoy?
And I think this is where like you know, it's like there's a fine line here. And so like I'm gonna take us into like interesting territory, I think. But like with like fairy like I'm thinking of like the fairy smut trend, right? Like that's where it's become normalized for women to like read smut that's like fantasy, like high fantasy smut. But like this idea of like one, there's so much shame and stigma around like women who indulge and or who even write that kind of literature, because it's not like literature. Um, but, it's like, there's an element of like reading a made up story that is more explicit around aspects of desire and relationship and specifically like sexual intimacy, like physical intimacy, and like allowing yourself to like get lost in that feeling and to question it. And there's other art forms too, right? Like whether it's like porn or other things, like that's where it's like it gets a little tricky because who's the narrator and who is the consumer and who's the target audience for it, right? And what is the story, like what is the actual intention behind whatever it is that you're creating? But there's like
Mhm.
but I think there's a difference between like erotica, whether it's in written form or audio or visual, and like the sort of commercial porn industry that can get a little hairy in terms of like consent or what's normal and not normal for a couple, or for like for people who are not porn stars, essentially. You know?
Right.
Like, and that line between like fantasy and reality can get really blurry too, because not every fantasy needs to be indulged, right? But there's that element of like, to your point, where it's like, okay, what do I like, what actually lights me up? Like, what am I actually interested in? And like having that permission or safety to be to say like, yeah, so I was reading this sex scene, or I was like watching this thing, and I really am curious about this and this and that. And if you're, I guess, I think for you, if your partner's not like open to that, or has any sort of like shame or stigma or like resistance to it, that can get tricky. I think you can't, it's hard to have that open conversation. But, and also it's just another way of like how creative expression can help us tune into what we want, what we desire, what we need, and explore that in a way that can be safe.
Exactly. And like how to be seen in our relationships, how to be vulnerable, how to be authentic, um, and how to resolve conflicts or resolve problems in relationships or like differences or, um, you know, deep emotional sort of struggles that people have. Like those can be resolved through fantasy, and if desired, acting those fantasies out as well in a way that's like fun and playful and um not so dreadful or tragic.
Yeah. So this is because I'm like, for me, like I'm all about play anyways. And I would 100,
Yeah.
if I were ever your client, I would 100% be like the party that's like, yeah, like let's have fun with this. Like let's go, let's like play, right? But I'm curious, like, so to me, I'm like, that's like now I'm like, yeah, like the possibilities are endless. Like this could be really
Exactly.
exciting. But I'm curious in terms of like the average client, like your average client, who might not be like so innately playful or so willing to sort of like explore fantasy, whatever, like just sort of dive into like, yeah, like how creative can we get? Um, what comes up, or sort of like how do you encourage that sense of play and people who might be like really repressed, or who are feeling like that, where that might be a struggle?
Yeah, I think in those cases they do really have to feel like safe, and so just little by little like opening up allows them to see like, okay, this person, you know, every time I share something just a little bit more, like they're not shaming or judging me, and I can see like maybe something is coming up for me personally, but there has to be a willingness to want to overcome that. Like, you know, somebody might say like, well, even, you know, myself and a lot of my clients who share the same background, like coming from a Catholic background, very like strict and conservative, and a lot of shame around sexuality, like there has to be some sort of insight into, okay, you know, I grew up with this, I don't feel good about it, I feel like it's getting in the way, and I do want to work on that and not feel ashamed. That will allow them to like keep pushing a little bit more to open up.
Testing the edges of their
Yeah,
comfort zone. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So like the more and more they'll like, you know, open up, the more then they might be open to like, okay, let's try a writing exercise, and the written, like usually writing it down will help them feel a little bit more safe than just, you know, saying it directly first, so they can like write it and then read what they wrote. There's like a little bit more distance, and usually I'll have them write in a persona, so like describing in third person whatever this fantasy is, and then you know, they can share it. And in all cases, at least for me, like the partner, I've never had a situation where the partner shames the other one, at least not in session. And nothing is like reported outside of session to happen that way. But who knows what happens outside of session. But no, I mean, usually there will be like an understanding, an appreciation of the vulnerability, and they will usually end up trying it. And the other partner then will do the same, right? Like both of them will engage in that exercise. And so it does require like a little bit of a shift, but there has to be a little bit of willingness to shift, right? Otherwise, then they're not going to engage in it.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you feel like your consent is being violated, it stops becoming fun.
Right.
Very quickly.
100%.
Very
Yeah.
quickly. Yeah. So, but yeah, and I think that's sort of like, the sort of frame that I have that is interesting. It's interesting to me, like I've been so fascinated with it lately just because I think, I'm innately playful, but I think also, and for so much of my life, I feel like I've like had to take myself more seriously. And so it's just this really interesting thing of like, right, like what if we just did this for fun? Like what if this was just about fun?
Right.
Like what if
Right.
there's no stakes? What if we don't worry about consequences, like apart from like safety consequences, like
Right.
physical safety consequences, right? But like what if we just start doing this for fun, and then as soon as it stops becoming fun, then we check in and decide if we want to keep doing it or not? And like, because, sometimes things aren't fun just because you're tired that day. And then sometimes things aren't fun because they're just really not fun.
Right.
You know, so I think it's an interesting question for people to explore in that sense of like, what if we just did this for fun, or what do I desire, and what if it was okay or safe for me to question, like to ask that question, and not just ask the question but explore it, and what are the different ways that I can explore it? And so I think that's like, to me that feels like a huge gateway into this world of like creative liberation, right, as an individual, which then I think it's that what is that, like a rising tide lifts all ships, I think. So I heard someone, but like I think as each of us like comes to that level of like, or comes into that space of, yeah, like I have my outlet and I get to choose how and when I engage with it and share it. Like not everybody has to blast their creativity on the internet, right? But having an outlet, having a space where you feel liberated and free, and um and in a way where it's not like there's, I can't remember, like I had this conversation with a group of creatives, or this came up in the conversation that we were having, and it was this like idea of like, you know, contain like containing creativity, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, where it's like, oh, I'm only allowed to do this like at 3 p.m. on Saturdays, or like I'm only, and like sometimes that's, if that's all you need, or if that's what where you are to start, I think that's fine. But there's also like, there's a point at which that can also become repressive, right? Where it's like, no, I'm only allowed in that space. And so that like, if the only place that I can be myself is in a 1 hour block of time on a Saturday, that's a red flag. So like that, something is not right in the world, and so, or in my world, and so that requires some attention. And and there's different factors that can be contributing to that, but I do think that is something, like another thing for people to just again like be observant of, is if you feel like you're policing yourself into like only being yourself in in this one particular space, or in this one moment in time, um like why, like investigate that. And I think for some people, like especially if it's an identity related issue, like if it's about your like queer expression, or gender expression, or any other thing, like sometimes there's safety involved. Like that's like, I need to do that because I'm not safe in my environment. And so like, this is a little like, if that's the case, then you have the answer and that's fine. And you know why you're doing that. But if in the moments where that's not true, or is that always true? Is that always the case? Like explore that, because what if you get to expand the limit of the spaces that you are free?
This makes me think so much about Burning Man.
Oh,
Can I rant about Burning Man?
uh, I mean, I'm sure, like, I know we talked about Burning Man before, but do you want to for the audience, do you want to give a summary?
Well, I feel like it's very much, I mean, there's a lot of creatives who go to Burning Man, a lot of healers, a lot of incredible people, and there's a lot of people who are also incredible people, but who like I think it is a bit of a trend with Burning Man, like with people who don't practice creativity and playfulness and self-liberation in their daily life. Burning Man is like that outlet of like, okay, once a year, I am going to dress however the fuck I want to dress. Like, I am going to let myself just be. I'm gonna let myself go. I'm gonna do spiritual healing practices, rituals, art things, like just whatever it is that they feel like doesn't really fit into their daily life. And I think that is kind of it's a missed opportunity, right?
Yeah.
For being able to integrate these practices into your daily life. It's like, it's amazing that Burning Man gives that outlet to people. However, why not take that and try to integrate it into your daily life? I feel like a lot of people attracted to it are people who really contain creativity a lot. At least from my experience of the people I know.
No shade. But I think what I'm hearing in that too is just like these extremes, right? Like I think there's this like the misconception around extremes, and I think it's I get there's like this where I get into my frustration and like rants around, like really black and white thinking or these sort of false equivalencies where it's like you're either free or you're not free, or you're either creative or you're not creative, and like there shall be no spectrum in between.
Right.
No bridge to between these two things. Never shall they meet. Right? And it's like that's not true. Right? That's a really rigid way of viewing and containing things. And I think this is like, and what's interesting about this too is I think this is also where some of the like misuse of boundaries and that conversation comes in too, where like boundaries are the purpose of boundaries is to foster safe and healthy connections, not to isolate, not to create, the type of dam that you have to stick your little finger, like the little Dutch boy has to stick his finger in to keep it from breaking, right? Like that, like there's boundaries, and then there's like Fort Knox, and they're different, they serve different purposes. And so I think part of what I hear you saying is like a lot of people who are attracted to Burning Man, or who when they go to Burning Man like go sort of balls to the wall with it, are the type of people where they have these like really rigid concepts around boundaries, and they have that like Fort Knox level of like compartmentalization, and like this is like I can't, I won't, this is a no, and like until I'm able to go to this space. And I think for some people that's just naturally how they're wired and operate. And so there's like a level of, if that works for you and you are content with your life operating that way, great, keep doing it. If that works for you, keep doing it. And I think there's a lot of people that suffer, and whether that's subconsciously or if they have any awareness of their suffering, but they're like, if they're unaware of the suffering, it's that like their health is always failing, or they're like high anxiety, or they're engaging in lots of like distractions or self-medications, or like they're chasing things outside of themselves to appease whatever like whatever like alarm bells are going off inside of them that's like, let us out, let us out, like you've been like, we're trapped in here, there's a fire, let us out. And they're like, no, like there's like, I just, that's fine, it's fine, I just need to, you know, like take some mushrooms, or like, you know, go for like a 10-mile run every other day, like every day. You know, and like, you know, not like grit. I mean, if you go for a 10-mile run and you like it, that's fine. But like, there's some people who do the extreme, like extreme level
Right.
um, exercise, because like that is how they're self-medicating, and it's effective. Studies show how effective it is. Um, but if you get injured, like again, like if you get injured and that's your only way of coping,
Mm-hmm.
like time to expand your horizon a bit, because that's going to be, it's sort of like the um I keep referring to like tarot terms. So like it's like that's gonna be your tower moment, right? It's like that's when the walls are like, things are gonna come crashing down, or the rug's gonna feel pulled out from under you, and it's really disruptive and destabilizing. It can be really destabilizing. That's the word I'm thinking of, right? It can be really destabilizing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I would love to see people wear their magical Burning Man creations and outfits like in on just a regular day, like out to get coffee or whatever, you know?
Yeah. Why not? Well, I think, and like the thing about that too is like, I feel like, you know, as we've just like, I'm in my fuck it era too, where I'm like, you know, there's an element of like, it is so empowering and inspiring to see somebody in their full authenticity, right? To see somebody dressed however the fuck they want to dress. And especially if they like put effort into it, especially if it's like a form of self-expression, and just be like, and like own it, right? Like be fully confident in it. And you're like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
like there's like, if I'm judging that person, it's because they're doing something, like I'm jealous that they get to be so free and I'm not. Like that's
Exactly.
at least personally,
Exactly.
like if when I'm operating from that place with people like that who are so like freely self-expressive, um my envy doesn't, like any envy or judgment, very little comes from their character. It comes from like, you know, like unless I actually know the person, then it might be character related. But like it's more of that like, God, I wish I could be that free. And then it's like, well, why can't I? Why can't you? Why can't
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I
I
don't know.
remember in high school, I would wear my prom dress like just on a regular Tuesday or something,
Of course you
or
would.
fairy wings or something. Like I was just so out there. I was such a weirdo, but because like I didn't care about what anybody thought about it. I was like, this makes me happy, so I'm gonna do it. Like I didn't, at least not to my face. I never got bullied about it or heard anything. Like people were just like, oh, interesting. Cool.
Interesting choice.
She's
Okay.
doing her thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And I think, and I do think that like, you know, for myself and for others, like there is an element of like when we did like the wound that's there is that shame, is that like when we tried to do that at some point in our lives, we were shamed in a way that was particularly traumatizing or difficult. And so then it's like, okay, no, it's not safe to be myself. We learn that we like, that's the
Exactly.
story that we start to believe. And then it's like, that's not, that may have been true at a time when you did not have the agency or the power or the authority to free
Right.
yourself from that environment. And or like, or if you're in a situation where like where you don't have the power, agency, or ability to free yourself from your current environment, like yeah, then it's not safe to fully express who you are. And so like that's something to explore again, like in terms of how do you navigate that challenge without like killing your soul. And I remember there was an acquaintance of mine here who is non-binary and like very much themselves. And And it's interesting because like they're very much like the embodiment of like a woodland sprite. That's the context in which I met them, and it's so their personality that I'm like, yeah, of course, like that's who they are.
Uh-huh.
But I remember we had this conversation, like somehow we had this conversation because like we were doing, I was learning about the local plants with an herbalist. We were in the same group, and somehow we ended up talking about like identity and conformity on this plant walk somehow, because when you walk around in the woods learning about plants, you know, deep things come up as it should, whatever. But I remember like we were talking about it because they were basically saying like it got to the point where like it was gonna like either like whether I was myself or I wasn't myself, like the odds of me dying as a like basically whether it's I die at my own hand because I'm repressing myself so much, or I risk my life by being myself so openly, like the consequences seem to be about the same. One allows me to be myself, the other, you know, is more of a like last resort situation for suffering. And so it was like, okay, that's real. That's real. And again, it's that piece of like everybody has their own choice and decision to make. But again, like that's also why creative self-expression is so liberating and and subversive, even when it's just existing. Like,
Exactly.
you know, being who you are.
Exactly. Yes, because that is like creative in itself. I mean, we're all such unique people.
We are a creation. You know, unto ourselves, and we get to make ourselves in our own image. You know?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
all right. I'm so proud of us. Uh, so for the audience, Allie and I, when we get into conversations, uh, easily 2 or 3 hours will fly by before either of us is like, oh, I guess we should probably wrap this conversation up. So I'm really proud of us that we've sort of made it to about an hour. And this feels, I'm sure like we could absolutely keep going. Uh, but I want to check in. And is there anything else that you want to share? Or anything else that like would be helpful for like, that would be, I mean, there's so much that I would love to keep talking about, but again, in the interest of your time and people's attention spans, what are your sort of closing thoughts, final thoughts on this topic?
I mean, I think it's just so important to continue having these conversations because this is what brings it out in the open and keeps us connected and moving towards this mission of self-liberation, communal liberation, and being more present and at peace with ourselves.
Yes. Here, here. Uh, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to share with people how they can find you if they want to follow along on the work that you do?
Yes. So on my Instagram handle is Misterio Psychotherapy.
I'll
So
put that in.
Misterio,
I'll
yeah.
put that Yeah. I'll have the right spelling for everybody in the description.
Yes. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.